Good evening, everyone. To the Thursday, March 7th, 2024, Woodstock Planning and Zoning Committee. Meeting, thank you. I have 7:30 p.m. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to go to the roll call. Tim Young, please start us off. Tim Young.
Mark Black, Joseph Adeletta,
Ian Gould, Jeffrey Marcotte,
Aaron Carvo, John Day,
Joe Pululik. Here's we have a forum. Dwight Ryanowitz. Hi, Dwight.
Hi, how's it going, Jeff?
Thanks for asking. Now we have 9, so we need, let's see. 1, 2. And we have 2 alternates. Wow, that works out good. So I'd like to see Dwight and John Day. Thank you all. Brings us to the Pledge of Allegiance. We all join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. Thank you. Brings us to the chair's report. Some meteorologists will say that March 1st is meteorological spring. I myself think that is the 22nd is the first full day of spring. So we have 12 days until the first day of spring. And I'd like to remind everyone to spring ahead at 2 a.m. on Sunday morning, not before 2 a.m. And we'll be in daylight savings time. So something to look forward to. Better days are coming, at least in my eyes. Agenda item 3, we have a couple of quick home occupation reviews, permits. I hope everybody took a look at them. They look pretty straightforward. And in my opinion, what we're looking for in a home occupation permit. I don't know if there's any discussion on that, John.
I think this was the older form. We had Dan help put together a newer one.
Well, it just so happens I spied Dan walking in, so we could put Dan on the spot.
I don't have an answer for you. I haven't reviewed any home applications yet, but I will see what form they're using. And is that when it occurred? We worked on a new form.
Yeah.
But you did.
You had issued it to maybe 1 or 2 of the new forms. So I'm sure they're in the office.
Okay.
I just got.
I'll work with Tracy to see what we're handing out. What's posted online.
Is there any other discussion? Okay, moving right along. That brings us to agenda item 4. Our annual legal training session with attorney Rich Roberts. And with that, I'll turn it over to Attorney Roberts. Thank you for coming, sir.
Sure. Sit over here to balance it out. Sit on the left, right. Yeah, I don't know, I was thinking it'd be like Guam, I'd tip it over if I went onto that side of the room.
Not everybody will get that reference.
Yeah, it's worth Googling that. Thank you for having me, and I figured I had received through Delia and Dan a number of questions, and I figured because they were questions that had been asked, that we'll start with answering those, and then any others that come up. The other thing I brought, in case we need filler to get at least to an hour to make it worthwhile for your training requirements, I brought a PowerPoint that I had borrowed from one of my colleagues who had used it in another town and changed it up to include information on Woodstock on affordable housing, so that you can kind of get the basic lay of the land on that. Questions that Delia forwarded to me from planning and zoning. No, I think it's.
Just note for the record that Sid Blodgett is joining us at 7:35. Hello, Sid.
No, it's on Wednesday. Didn't miss a thing. First question that I got from Delia was, does the town and or the P and Z have an obligation to adopt regulations in regard to Airbnbs in private tax districts? The short answer is no, you have no obligation to do that unless you want to do it. Your zoning has private tax districts as lake districts, so if you did anything in the zoning regulations, it would apply to all of them, not just to one. But I think as a, kind of as a starting point, you have to work from the perspective of, if you're promoting an application on something like that yourself, what do you think is good for either the town or a particular district? Not, is it serving the purpose of a private tax district? And I know the whole issue is complicated by the kind of deed covenants that they may have, and the enforcement mechanisms that may exist in the private tax districts that's completely unrelated to town ordinances and planning and zoning. So while you don't have an obligation to do anything either for them or to them, if you as a body believe that it's something worth doing, then, by all means do it. The flip side of it is, as a commission, more often than not, you're responding to applications that other people have filed, rather than ones that you're creating of your own initiative. So if someone from one of the private tax district comes in with a proposed text change, it would have to be uniform among all the properties within a particular zone, and you would have to determine that it's got a public health and safety benefit to either the whole town or to that zone, as a basis for enacting it. So I know there's been a lot of correspondence and a lot of controversy about it. So I didn't know if anybody else had any thoughts or questions before we move on to the next one.
Can it just be one tax district that gets the regulation, or if it's called a tax district, all the areas that are designated as tax districts have to follow the regulation?
If it's a zoning regulation, it's by zone, not by district. And I think basically all of your tax districts are in Lake District.
They're also the land use lake district,
Right.
same areas.
Yeah, but that is it. It's one lake district. So if you were to adopt a regulation, it would apply to all of them. Unless they seek to change their own zone to create, Lake District 1 that, has some different configuration and regulations so that they can make it apply only to them, but, that makes it complicated.
And just one other quick question related to that. If there's an application form created, but there are no regulations about the application. More specifically, we have bed and breakfasts that are defined in the regulations. And we've been using a home occupation form or application to cover the bed and breakfast.
Okay.
And I think the only thing we have for bed and breakfast in the regulations is stated, and that's a use by right in the community district. And then there's the definition.
It's in both districts.
Both, okay, and both, and there's a definition, but there's no specific regulation other than under the home occupation. If we want to create an application form a little bit more detail. Something like a short-term rental. Is it, can we just use definitions to help a CEO understand how to address that particular use in the town?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to regulate them, you know, you would want to have the definition that says what they are. You may want to have additional kind of performance standards. I've never been a fan of putting the regulations into the definition. You know, define something as a bottle of Diet Coke, you know, that's fine, but then you define it to be, you know, 0% fat, 3% sodium, you know, that should be in some other part of the regulations where you're setting the performance standards for an Airbnb. And I think, there's, you know, you've seen the forms or the forms of regulations from other places and you know, they can be quite lengthy and detailed and restrictive and so forth. You know, I'd say, you know, create the use, define it, decide where you're going to put it. Then maybe have additional performance standards in the special permit regulations, if that's how you're going to allow them. Or somewhere else, you know, depending on whether it's going to be just a, you know, a zoning permit or a special permit. And maybe have a specific form for that, just so that you're not filling things out that are completely irrelevant. And if there is, you know, additional specific information that you're looking for from an applicant regarding Airbnb, they can put it on there without, you know, basically attaching additional sheets on an irrelevant form.
I'd like to note for the record that David Morse joined us at 7:37. John, you had a question?
I do. On the flip side, are the tax districts able to come up with their own regulations? Regulate STRs that are more strict or are more sort of clear cut than the town? If they wanted to so do.
Yeah, I mean, I think I won't pretend to know everything about their organizational documents and what inherent powers they have. I know that in some cases they're relying on, you know, restrictive covenants from when Joe Kemper created the areas and so forth. There may be others that are, you know, special taxing districts that are created under, you know, the general statutes. You know, that as a general rule, they don't have zoning powers unless they've been granted to them specifically, but you know, they may have the ability to enact ordinances that apply within you know, within their geographic limits. And actually, one of the kind of frequent discussions about short-term rentals is whether you do it through zoning or whether you do it through an ordinance, so that it, you know, it's the Board of Selectmen's headache rather than yours and Dan's. And there haven't been enough cases on it to decide one way or the other, but I think a lot of them have tended to be, you know, done through a specific ordinance with a permitting process rather than through zoning.
So the answer basically is probably to some extent, but it's not clear exactly, depending on how their bylaws are written. Not clear exactly how far the regs should go. For instance, I guess one of the things that struck me is how much complaining there is about noise and traffic, et cetera, et cetera. And are they not free to set up their own rules and regulations around those things or not?
Yeah, probably. You know, I just, like I said, I don't know what legal basis they were created under and, you know, whether it's just a taxing district or whether it has additional powers, you know, above and beyond that. But, you know, I think the legally constituted district can pass ordinances and so forth. You know, to control, to exercise police powers within its own property.
But they would have to do their own enforcement. They can't ask the town to do it, right?
If the town ordinance was set up to govern Airbnb, would that apply to even those packages as well?
Yeah, if it was a town ordinance, it would apply to everybody.
I just want to follow up on John, that my understanding, based on many discussions here, is that the lake districts can essentially set tighter standards than the town. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, they can't allow things that the town prohibits.
Right.
But they can prohibit things the town allows.
What's the process for writing an ordinance then? Who's responsible for that?
It would be the governing body of the district. And it would generally involve, you know, a meeting of the electeds within the district would have to approve it, just like a, you know, a town meeting would be the equivalent of a district meeting.
But if it was a town ordinance, wouldn't it be done by the selectmen?
Well, it would be done by the selectmen through a town ordinance, but if it was a district ordinance, it would be kind of come within their confines, you know.
So when you say district, you're not talking about a land use district, you're talking about the tax district?
Correct.
I was under the impression that they function more through deed restrictions than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that has been kind of the line of first offense or defense, depending on your perspective, is, you know, not allowing commercial uses, you know, in some or all of the districts. And, you know, then it's a question of who has standing to enforce it. And it's kind of their problem at that point. Next question is, are there any classes coming up we should take? I'm not aware of any offhand that, you know, are coming up kind of in the near term. Just keep an eye on the Land Use Academy and the CCAPA schedules. I mean, they're, you know, webinars probably every week. You know, particularly the ones through the Land Use Academy. I think they've tended to try to record those so that you can watch them at your leisure and get the credits, you know, without having to be there on any particular night or day to get it. It'll be interesting to see what the, you know, compliance rate is. You know, the commission that I'm on, I think of the 9 members, 7 of us, well, 2 of us are exempt, 5 got the training and 2 didn't. And those are the same 2 who generally don't go to the meetings, so. Sort of not a surprise who was on the list. Trying to remember that, I think I've heard of at least one additional either training or reporting requirement that's being proposed. I know there was a conversation about requiring all wetlands commissioners to take training because they thought they were doing a bad job, but I don't know how far that's going to go. Yeah, but it will be interesting to see what the, you know, what the compliance has been. Frankly, I think it's been pretty good. You know, most people take it seriously enough to, you know, put in the effort. what should PZC or ZBA members do when they receive mail addressed to them that is about a pending application or about a topic that they will be discussing and likely will be making a decision about? Mail might go to their house or they might get it via the town hall, but addressed to them. I think probably the most important thing is that if you get any kind of mail like that, you know, if you read it, you know, make sure that it gets brought to town hall and given to Delia so that it can be included in the record, whatever, you know, application or matter it is. You know, just so that it's on file that you received it. If you don't open it, just bring it unopened. I mean, it's kind of hard to know what something is without opening it, and then like, oh, I didn't mean to look at this. If the public hearing is still open or hasn't yet opened on something that you get a letter about, you know, it's kind of no harm, no foul. Say I received this, you know, and I want it to be part of the hearing record. I didn't, you know, I read it, but it's kind of more often than not, it'll be kind of redundant and duplicative of whatever testimony people are giving during the meetings. But if it's, you know, if it's something kind of breaking news and earth shattering, I think it's more important to get it into town hall so that it becomes part of the record for the application in case anybody tries to claim that you were given, you know, secret information or information that caused you to make your mind up in a certain way that nobody had an opportunity to respond to. I don't know how common it is. And frankly, a dozen years ago, I'd get stuff in the mail occasionally, but I really haven't lately. You know, once in a while, it's an email or something like that. But I think people are more likely to put stuff on Facebook than they are to mail letters these days.
A lot of money.
Yeah,
Quick question on that. If a public hearing is closed, can commissioners still provide information to the commission?
if the public hearing is closed, you probably are very limited in terms of what additional new information you can provide. You know, the theory is that you're making your decision based on what was discussed during the hearing. And if after the hearing closes, you either receive information or, you know, you disclose information that affects other people's opinions on something, you know, either the applicant or the opponents may say, well, wait a minute, we didn't get a chance to respond to that. You know, and that's where the, you know, the fairness and the ex parte issue comes up. There's a relatively narrow group of things that it's okay to discuss or to divulge after the hearing is closed, but that's usually done through either staff or an expert where, you know, the applicant's engineer came in with the revised drainage study or something like that. And you ask to have the town's engineer confirm that the calculations are correct or something like that. You know, that sort of thing is okay, but you know, if someone comes in after the hearing has closed with a completely redesigned, you know, site plan or something like that, which are not things that you had discussed while the hearing was still open, that's when it's problematic. And new kind of information or research that either reinforces or contradicts, you know, what was said during the hearing may also, you know, be problematic if it sways how people vote, and, you know, whichever party it's prejudicial to doesn't have an opportunity to respond to it. So, you know, the ideal is to, you know, essentially get all of the information into the record before the hearing is closed, and then make your decision based on what's there. You know, you can talk about it, you can decide which things are, you know, credible or not credible, which things you think are important or not important, but, you know, try to avoid having completely new and different information put in, you know, afterward. Usually from Delia, this is like a 13-part question. Um, Actually, I'll do the ZBA ones and then talk about all the affordable housing stuff afterward. Got a question, couple of questions from the ZBA. This one's a 7-part question. Review the situations when an ex officio person should participate in a ZBA meeting. First, does that person's presence create a legal quorum? And I think the answer to that one is yes. Is the person allowed to speak during a public hearing or the decision-making process? Yes. During the public hearing anyway. You know, the decision-making process is a little bit murkier because, you know, someone's who's an ex officio member of a board or commission, like the first selectman is ex officio member of all town boards and commissions. And so, you know, Jay could come in here and sit and, you know, participate and do everything short of voting. You know, so I guess arguably they would be allowed to participate in the decision-making process, even if they aren't allowed to vote, but that, you know, that seems like it would be a lot more problematic than if they just participated during the public hearing or asked questions or something like that, because, you know, for example, if you have an alternate who participates in the hearing but isn't seated for the deliberations, you know, the fact that they participated during the hearing and asked questions and so forth is great, but they're not seated, they're not voting, you know, they shouldn't be participating in the deliberation. And, you know, I'm thinking, you know, maybe an ex officio member probably falls into that same category, but I'm not aware of any, you know, authoritative decision on that.
Does the ex officio member also allowed to sit in executive session?
Yes. Yeah, I was involved in one situation where that occurred and the Freedom of Information Commission said it was fine because, you know, they're treated as a member of the agency for all purposes other than voting. Does the person have the authority to vote on a decision of the ZBA? No. If not, how is the question of need for a quorum needed for the decision addressed? I guess that since it's your question, I'll ask you whether you were talking about just having a quorum to be able to have the meeting or to be able to have the 4 people to vote to approve a variance or.
Yes, when resignations have taken place, the ZBA is not fully staffed. There's not enough members, then the moment could arise in which we can make a quorum by having the ex officio present, but we can't make a decision after the discussion because there's not enough people present.
Yeah, that doesn't do you much good.
Thank you, that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it at least gets you through the point where, you know, you've held the legal hearing because there has been a quorum present to hold the hearing and to keep the meeting going and to table the item and continue to another meeting. You know, but at that point, you hope somebody is appointed to fill the vacancy and familiarizes themselves with the record and can participate and actually vote on it at a subsequent meeting.
And so
Sure.
case that the public hearing would be closed. And then the discussion take place at the subsequent meeting, or the discussion begun and tabled to the following.
I think you could do it either way. You know, I think the one advantage to continuing the public hearing might be that, you know, if someone actually is going to be appointed, they'll be able to, you know, at least participate in the tail end of the hearing, you know, as well as the deliberations, and won't be just left with, you know, vote yes or no based on information that other people have been able to ask about. Discuss the lead times needed for an application, including the timing of legal notices, given that the newspaper is a weekly publication, town hall is closed on Friday. Yeah, I don't have any specific bright ideas on that one, other than, you know, you kind of work back from your meeting with the 15-10-2 for the dates for the required publications of the notices. You know, one of the things that I think, you know, because your commissions seem to be good about taking things when they come in and processing them promptly, you know, is that legally you do have a longer period of time probably than you actually use, you know, to be able to open a public hearing and so forth. So if you get jammed up that you didn't, you know, you didn't publish the first notice, you know, because I think, you know, some of the newspapers are notoriously inept about, oh, you know, oh, I forgot. You know, I know one other town that's constantly having trouble because the notices are not getting published, and you know, so that they're the meetings that, or the hearings that they wanted to have in March are being in April and so forth. But I think if you just kind of work out a template, which you probably already have, as far as, you know, we need the application in by X date in order to get the, you know, the legal notice in the first time, the second time, and then, you know, have the public hearing. The next question is generally just the logistics of, if you, it seemed like a couple of different things. One, you know, that the meeting room that the ZBA uses is small, but if it turns out that a whole lot of people come and exceeds the capacity of the room, what do you do? And I guess my, you know, kind of overly obvious advice is that if you anticipate that something is going to be so controversial that it's going to bring out more than the X people that you can accommodate, you know, legally in your normal room, you know, either continue the hearing to another time when you can get a bigger place, or get the bigger place, you know, in the first instance. Some bigger towns have the luxury of having, you know, staff and people who can turn on the lights in a bigger room, or you may have a school that you can go to at the drop of a hat. You know, coincidentally, I remember the first meeting I attended as a member of my town's planning and zoning commission meeting. You know, I got to the parking lot at 6:45 and there were no spaces. And it's like, oh, this is interesting. And, you know, essentially by the time I was walking into the building, a parade of people was walking out. Because they had already concluded that one of the public hearing items had so many people that, you know, they were walking down the sidewalk to go to the middle school to use the auditorium, you know, which had been kind of identified as a fallback option. You know, and the good news was that, you know, by the time most of the members of the public had walked out, the applicant withdrew the application because they just didn't want to deal with it. So,
If it's
publicize that you want to be in meeting room A for this, and then all of a sudden you fill it up, and you're like, oh, meeting room B is a lot bigger, can you just decide to move it a few minutes prior to the meeting, or because it was advertised? Being in this room?
You're probably okay as long as there's either a sign on the door or somebody here redirecting everybody who's coming to room A. You know, tell them, you know, get back in your car and drive to the academy or whatever you need to do. You know, if you change it a day ahead of time and don't tell anyone, you know, that's when you get into trouble. But, you know, I've probably seen it half a dozen times where it's like, oh Lord, you know, we've got way more people than we anticipated. Where are we gonna move to? And, you know, more often than not, we also advise that, if you're gonna be doing that, you know, start later just to make sure that everybody who wanted to attend, who went to the now wrong place, has an opportunity to get to the right place and to, you know, park and get settled and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, if you're in a situation where, you know, out of the blue, you know, you have 75 people who want to attend the room that's set up for 15, and you literally don't have, you know, a plan B available, then I think you can, you know, open the hearing and continue it immediately to some date, time and place, you know, where you can accommodate however many people there are. It may take some tap dancing on your part to be able to identify where, you know, what the time, date and place might be. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be the next day, it could be the next week. You know, but you want to have it, particularly if it's something that really has that much public interest, you probably would rather do it sooner rather than later, you know, not, you know, kick it over a month or something like that, because that'll just irritate people, and you may also run into some problems just with your statutory timelines. Did you have any other follow-up questions on any of them?
If it's changed 2 weeks out, it'll be out.
If you actually open the hearing and continue it to another date, no, because you will have, you know, it's a continuation of the hearing that's been open. But if you don't actually open the hearing, you would need to republish it.
Thank you.
Yep. Does anybody else have any general questions? The next ones kind of pertain to affordable housing. Sure.
If the subject comes up in here and there's a conflict of interest and you recuse yourself, when that comes around to voting on it, do you abstain, or are you already not included in that?
You know, if there's a public hearing and you have a conflict of interest, you say, I recuse myself, and you go away or just sit quietly. I would say that, you know, when it comes time to make, you know, to do the deliberations and vote, I would again say I'm recusing myself from this. And the only time I would abstain rather than just be silent is if you were needed to maintain a quorum.
So just by recusing yourself, you're eliminating yourself from the whole process.
Right, and you're not even counting toward the quorum. You're not there for all intents and purposes of that particular matter.
Okay.
Related to that, if a commissioner says there's a potential, have a potential conflict, and presenting it to the commission says we're okay with that potential conflict, you can stay in the discussion and voting, and it goes against the applicant. The applicant have grounds to say, well, I had a commission, like the applicant.
I guess I have two responses to that. One is, it's not up to the rest of the commission to decide whether that individual can stay or not. They have to make that decision on their own. You know, it's probably good practice if you have a conflict of interest, say, you know, this is the situation, and, you know, everybody says, well, that's fine. You know, but technically, the decision as to whether you need to recuse yourself is one that you have to make. You can't take a vote and say, you know, 8-1, Tim, get out. The other answer, the other part of the question is that if there's a discussion about the potential conflict of interest, everybody says, yeah, I don't have a problem with that. And the commissioner continues to participate, as long as nobody in the audience or the applicant objects, they've waived their right to object to it. So, you know, if everybody on the commission said, yeah, it's okay, you can participate, but the applicant says, no, I have a real problem with this because you know, you spit on my mother's grave, you know, and you shouldn't be participating in this kind of thing. You know, at least they have preserved their, you know, their claim that you were participating improperly. But if everybody else, you know, just kind of sits on their hands and nods their heads, then, you know, for purpose of being able to raise the issue later on, they've waived it. The only time that wouldn't be the case is that if whatever the potential conflict of interest was something that they did not know and could not have known at the time of the meeting. You know, it's something, you know, that could only have been discovered later. You know, that's the one exception to the requirement that if someone wants to claim a conflict of interest, they have to do it at the time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, the applicant, could be somebody else, but, you know, if someone raises it during the hearing or during the meeting, during the hearing, you know, at least it's preserved as a potential challenge later on, but otherwise it's gone.
Or just ask it, then it may have to define the conflict of interest a little bit more, because there are a lot of commissioners who have customers and clients and work for applicants who present, you know, a request for a permit or an application for the commission. So then find how strict you want to be about not having a conflict. Maybe commissioner.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, and that, you know, it's just kind of the reality of living in a small town. You know, you're related to people, you work with people, you work for people, you have business relationships with people. You know, at the end of the day, it all comes down to whether you know, the kind of the boxes to check is whether you have, you know, an indirect personal or financial interest in the application. And if, you know, you built an addition on somebody's house 20 years ago and have no interest in whatever it is, you know, that they're applying for now, you know, that's probably not a conflict of interest. But if, you know, if it's one of your biggest clients, you know, even if it's in a different context, you know, that then, you know, you probably have to look at it a different way. You know, whenever anybody who's one of my clients applies for anything in front of our commission, I'm just like, I don't even want to discuss whether it's conflict of interest or not. I'll just say it is. Yeah. How does Woodstock move toward increasing the supply of affordable housing? Build it. Yeah, I mean, Actually, I was at a meeting last night. It was the real estate and the planning and zoning sections of the Bar Association. And that was one of the questions, was how to increase the supply of affordable housing. And, you know, as trite as it sounds, I mean, you have to either, you know, convert existing housing, or you have to get somebody to build it. And one of the people was asking, you know, questions like, how do you make it more affordable to build affordable housing? And, you know, that's kind of the issues that the legislature is grappling with in terms of, you know, allowing higher densities, minimizing or reducing the amount of, you know, required parking, you know, changing which building codes apply. You know, a lot of different things that are designed to make it, you know, more economically feasible to build the affordable housing. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that make it easier and more desirable, you know, don't really apply themselves well to, you know, rural towns without, you know, a tremendous amount of infrastructure. So, whether houses on septic versus sewer would be more affordable. Your affordable housing plan is good, but, you know, so much of it just relies or depends on, you know, some developer wanting to come in and build it, unless you get a nonprofit or the town or someone who wants to build it. So it's, you know, it's kind of a challenge.
Moving on, I think statute 80-20 A or something that gives a developer the ability to waive certain zoning requirements if they're
830G.
30 G.
Yes, this is in the Starlit affordable housing. Fortunately, Mike Ziska has much more desirable PowerPoint skills than I do. So instead of being a parade of walls of words with one color screens, you know, he's got a good one here. So I guess, you know, we'll just go through that. And I think, you know, for some of you, I think this is clearly going to be, you know, redundant, but it kind of flows from that. 830G is the statute that essentially shifts the burden from the applicant to the town with respect to certain types of affordable housing projects. And what the starting point is the 830G applies to municipalities in the state where less than 10% of the housing stock is affordable as determined by the state statutory definition. And, you know, I think the first thing that's important to notice is that, you know, the statutory definition of affordable housing is not the intuitive definition of affordable housing. You know, it's not, you know, how much, you know, can I afford to live here? It's, you know, is it, you know, assisted housing receiving certain kinds of rental assistance? You know, is it subsidized housing? Is it housing that was developed using certain federal grants? You know, is it CHFA loans? Is it Department of Agriculture loans? And then the last one, the kind of tiny printing here, is the one that I think most people think of when they think of the affordable housing under this statute, which is where you have a development of a certain size and you set aside 30% of the units within the development to be affordable, either by deed restrictions or rental restrictions, so that some percentage of the units, are for folks who make less than 80% of the regional median income, and others who make less than 60% of the area median income. So, those are the ones that are usually the more controversial ones. The different types of affordable housing that are listed above, I mean, you probably wouldn't know if your next door neighbor had a CHFA mortgage. But, in most cases, that's one of the big contributors toward your 10% goal of affordable housing. In fact, in Woodstock, I don't think any of the affordable housing is deed restricted. I think it's all, it's all either, CHFA or some other kind of subsidy. The number of housing units, I mean, I've tried to find more current information, but the link was still valid for the 2010 census. Said Woodstock had 3,582 housing units. So to be, exempt from the requirements of 830G, you'd need to have 358 of those be affordable. We're a little short of that at 56. So it's like 1.5% instead of 10.
The new totals came out and they're on the next planning and zoning agenda. I'm gonna give the report submission.
All right, spoiler alert. One of the things that's been done in the last couple of years in legislation is the 8-2, which is the general enabling statute for zoning. The regulation, the statutes describing and mandating what can and can't be included in your zoning regulations, they've really beefed up the specificity regarding fair housing and affordable housing. Before it used to be kind of wishy-washy language. And now, some of the sections that are quoted here were added by Public Act 2129, which is the same one that created the accessory dwelling units and the reduced parking requirements and so forth. And the last one here, where is the regulation shall be drafted, for physical site characteristics and so forth, that replaced the one that had talked about character, which was, quite often used as sort of a proxy for, the reason to keep out affordable housing. The next slide lists some of the other things that your regulations shall do. How you specifically do them, I think probably flow from your affordable housing plan, but I think if you're looking at your regulations, you need to keep these sorts of things in the back of your mind, just to make sure that you're not actively undermining these goals with what's in your regulations. The next two, on D, they shall not, they're you can't prohibit certain kinds of group childcare facilities or childcare homes in a residential zone. And you can't prohibit manufactured housing. I don't think your regulations do, but that is just something that's in there. You can't establish a minimum floor area that's higher than whatever is set forth in the building code. So you can't mandate that every apartment has to be 1,200 square feet or something like that, as a sort of a backdoor way to prevent smaller or affordable housing from being built. You don't and you can't put basically a cap on the number of multifamily units in your town. I don't know if anybody had, but you can't. And then the last one, D9 there. One of the missions of the folks that were revising the legislation was to try to drive down the cost of developing housing and affordable housing, multifamily housing in particular, and they had determined that some municipalities were creating a barrier by putting up very high requirements in terms of the number of parking spaces that had to be provided for each bedroom or dwelling unit. And it was essentially to, minimize the amount that could be built on a site. So they set basically a statutory maximum of the number of parking spaces that you can require in your regulations for dwelling units of varying sizes.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Sure.
On that first one that don'ts, is that? Couple of ones back, the one before about mobile homes.
Yep.
Mobile manufactured homes, so don't we restrict those? In town?
Yeah, I think you restrict trailers.
So
But-
what's a,
Manufactured homes they're basically the modular. homes.
yeah, but what's a mobile manufactured home?
Our trailer ordinance, I think, is about camper trailers and those kinds of things, RVs and people living in them.
No, I think
No,
for those,
no.
they were about the mobile homes that you can, they
Right.
come on wheels, you can go stick them up on.
I don't think we prohibit those.
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
We have, our trail ordinance is 17 different sections long, so it's a little
Right.
confusing.
But I'm pretty sure we restrict them.
yeah, I think that the way this is defined is that it's the 22 feet wide, it's basically allowing double wides.
Yeah.
And I think the trailer ordinance, deals with kind of the ones from the 1950s that haven't been demolished yet.
By the way, what makes mobile homes mobile after you take the wheels off? Tornadoes.
But no, I just know that, I just wanted. That looked like it conflicted with what we have.
Yeah, it looks like it does, but I think it is consistent only because of the definition of mobile manufactured home is bigger than the ones that we prohibit through our trailer ordinance. Let's see. Go to the one that says 82I. What that one is, and not a whole lot of towns have taken advantage of that, is that there is a statute that permits inclusionary zoning. And at least at one point in time, if a town had passed regulations that did this and encouraged the development, there was state money available to help build it. It's more of an incentive than it is, the carrot and stick that 830G is. 830J was the affordable housing plan that I think you guys did last year. I think the statute was changed, so you don't have to do them anymore.
Did it fix the one that said we had to do it every 5 years? And then there was something about how there was gonna be a regional housing plan? And now are we up to the regional housing plan?
I think so, yeah.
Try to keep up with all these.
I know. Well, I mean, it'll be different next month too. Next one, the 830G, this is what Joe was asking about. This is the one where the kind of the burden of proof shift is from the developer to the town if you deny something. And so the affordable housing development is either assisted housing or the set aside where you identify, 30% of the units that are gonna be set aside for people with the low and moderate income. Assisted housing refers to the different federal programs. So the set aside development is defined where, again, at least 30% of the units have to be set aside for a period of 40 years, either through a deed restriction if they're going to be sold, or a rental restriction if they're going to be rented out. Tied to individuals in the categories of less than or equal to 80% of the median income in the area, and less than or equal to 60% of the median income in the area, so that, basically up to 70% of the units can be market rate, the rest have to be set aside as, affordable. Median income for purposes of here,
With that 40 years, do you just have to income qualify at the beginning? What if your income goes up? So it's gonna like, I don't know,
yeah, you,
penalize you or kick you out?
yeah, I don't know, well, literally, yes.
Do you lose your house if you end up
Well,
making more money?
if you buy it, you're allowed to prosper, but you're limited on how much you can resell it for. The house itself is still limited to the, the 80% or the 60%, even if you,
But only for the 40 years, right?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and we're 30 years into this, so, that it's not forever, but, when they are tied to rental units and somebody kind of gets a better job, gets a raise and no longer qualifies, the affordability plan has to explain how the next opportunity, will be made available to someone, at a lower rate.
So the person then just have to pay more in rent, or do they have to move out and is it evaluated every year when their lease is renewed?
It's in the affordability plan. It's usually every year. They have to certify every year. And I think, it may not be that they have to move out if you can make sure that one of the other units next time it becomes available is, even if it hadn't been established as one of the affordable units, that one goes to somebody who is in the 60 or 80% category. Yeah, here the median income is slightly lower than the state, so the 80% is, 81,000, the 60% is 61,000.
What page are you
No,
Page are you on?
they don't have numbers.
Yours has a circle, so I don't know which.
It says 830G in the top.
Mine doesn't have. This
It's
looks
got
like
a,
you for-
it's got a picture of a house. That
There
one,
you go.
yeah. Yeah, this just says what the median incomes for a family. I think it's a family of 4 would be here. Next one, which also has a picture of a house on it, that's not helpful. Describes what has to go into the affordable housing plan, which, is part of the application. The developer kind of lays out what it is they're going to do, if it's going to be a project where the units are sold, or a project where, it's rental units. How are they going to be making outreach to the target audience? How are they going to be qualifying people? How are they going to be calculating things? Explaining how they're going to make sure that basically they don't build and sell all of the market rate houses first, and then like, whoops, we don't have any, we don't have any money left to build houses, so we're not gonna make any affordable ones. You know, just essentially explaining how it is they're going to comply with the, you know, the provisions of 830G. And the where the impact of the statute comes in is if the application is denied, the burden shifts to the commission. And the commission would have to show substantial evidence in the record that the denial is supported by decision is necessary to protect substantial public interests in public health, safety, and other matters. Second, that such public interests clearly outweigh the need for affordable housing. And finally, that such public interest cannot be protected by any reasonable changes to the affordable housing development. So, you know, the long and short of it is that if you have one of these applications and you deny them, you really have to have very solid reasons that are ones that, you know, essentially can't be fixed by changing the application, and which are significant health and safety issues. A lot of them have kind of come down to things like, you know, traffic, you know, the next one talks about things that fall short. You know, wanting to preserve kind of open, non-dense development is not a good reason. Traffic, unless you manage to find and prove actual safety hazards, you know, is not sufficient to justify the denial. There were a couple of situations where, yeah, this one doesn't have a picture of a house on it. Yeah, a picture of a park bench and a like. I think there was one where the only access into the site was on a 12-foot wide road that went underneath a railroad bridge or something like that. And that, you know, it was clear that, you know, you can only have one-way traffic and fire trucks may or may not be able to get there. I think in that situation, it was found to be a substantial, you know, public interest that was being served. But, you know, it really requires solid expert testimony on the part of the commission to be able to sustain, you know, the denial. If you've denied the application, they can, the applicant can come back and propose a modification that addresses your concerns. And you have to have a public hearing to discuss those modifications. So it kind of, it's an opportunity for a shortcut on a court appeal, but you know, at that point, you're more likely than not to, you know, to end up in court, you know, if you don't want to hear what they have to say. One of the things that the fair share requirement, this was one of the really big controversies last year in the legislature, was there was a fair share bill that was designed to identify how many housing units each municipality in the state needed to come up with in order to provide their fair share of affordable housing for the state of Connecticut. And, you know, I know in some smaller towns, the number that had been generated was, you know, a large multiple of the number of houses that had been built in the last 20 years. You know, so I think some people were, you know, legitimately concerned that they were going to lose out on, you know, state grants if they couldn't come up with some way to say, you know, how's the town of Chaplin gonna build 114 houses when we do 6 a year? You know, that sort of thing. So in order to get some of the other elements of the legislation that they wanted passed, the proponents kind of backed off and said, no, we're not going to, you know, mandate the fair share requirements. We're just going to require OPM to come up with what the methodology for telling you what that number is. You know, and that is supposed to be done by the end of this year. You know, so that it essentially lays out how many, you know, affordable housing units are supposed to be created in each municipality in a planning region.
Plan with the help of the commission, I reached out to the state and I asked them, because of those 4 categories that count for the total, I asked them, how can we get more of those vouchers? How can we promote that type of mortgage? How can we do something about the kinds of options that we count, aside from the town building more housing, because they're probably not going to. And so there's nothing you can do. So the only thing the town could do to increase the amount is the town building housing or the commission deed restricting, but our subdivisions for many years have been really small. I don't think that it seems realistic to require a certain percentage of a 2 or 3 lot subdivision to be affordable. The cost of the land and the subdivision process and surveying and building it, that alone is gonna bring it probably over what would be affordable.
Yeah.
So I don't know how the Woodstock could do anything about it. They're not gonna build their own housing.
No, I mean, and even if you were gonna do that, I know there was one town that had concluded based on what the construction costs were for houses that were being built already, that to construct their fair share of the housing for the region, it was going to be something like $600 million worth of, you know, housing construction, and they didn't honestly think they could get that bonded.
If someone managed to do that, it's not an affordable place to live for many people. Not that you shouldn't be allowed to choose to live here, but if there's not a lot of employment, you can't walk to things to save money, like walk to a store or walk to school or walk to a job. There's no sidewalks. You have to have a car, which is a huge expense. So even if you plunk down some affordable house somehow, because it fell from the sky or something, it's not going to be much of a privilege to live in it when you're don't have the money to pay for the car to get there.
No, I mean, and it's, you know, I don't think anybody can deny that it's a significant societal problem. It's just, you know, there's no quick and easy solution. Daycare and group homes. Essentially, there's a public policy that the state legislature has adopted that has identified certain kinds of facilities that are good for the community and good for the residents, and you know, should essentially be treated the same as single family residences for purposes of being allowed to be placed in a certain zone and not having any additional you know, requirements or restrictions in order to be constructed. In addition to the state laws, there's obviously federal fair housing law, the ADA, which requires certain kinds of accommodations, and then, you know, the last 2, you know, are certain couple additional kinds of daycare and group homes. There's one of them, the child care facilities for 8 or fewer, I think. You know, they have to be at least 1,000 feet apart from each other. And then there's an additional you know, requirement that some of the other ones have to be approved by the body exercising the zoning powers, which would be you, but it's not, you know, it's not a particular permit application or anything like that. I think, the short answer on all those is that, if someone was going to be proposing one of those types of, residential facilities, give me a call and we'll figure out which one it falls under, and what, if any, authority you have to do anything about it. I know a couple of our other towns are dealing with this right now. One town seems to be very popular in the group home community. And some of the residents are getting a little heated about it, but the way the legislation is written, there's not much the town can do about it. Well, it's that.
If there is a developer who comes in and says, I'm gonna do something under 8-30G, and say some of the towns regulated don't apply, things like setback and height of the building, 55 foot to 5-story kind of place. And that exceeds our height requirements. That's permissible for the developer if he's meeting the other conditions of the 8-30G.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, an 830G application doesn't need to comply with your zoning regulation. And you can only deny it for, the substantial public interest reason. Quite often, I think, in a lot of cases, it's sort of unfeasible to build them, 65 feet high, but a lot of them are, 35, 40, 55. And, that's where, particularly like down in Fairfield County, where they have to be, a certain volume to make them economically viable. They run into issues with, fire access and things like that. There's been a great deal of litigation in a couple of towns that, I think like Westport probably has put a whole bunch of attorneys' families through college litigating, affordable housing cases. So, then on the other hand, I mean, there's some projects that are proposed. I can think of one in a town we represent in New London County where essentially the affordable housing developer was repurposing a closed nursing home. And, they were kind of gutting it out and turning them into apartments. And, it was an existing facility on public water and sewer, with plenty of parking, with all the infrastructure. The only thing I think that the town asked them for was, build a sidewalk to connect it to the sidewalk near the school. And, they didn't really have any basis for requiring that, but the applicant was kind of like, yeah, sure. And that got approved, and people are living in it, and it's not an issue.
So if somebody wanted to put an affordable housing apartment, you would say like next to the inn, it's got sewer there. There's really nothing we can do so they can't put the sewer or anything. Cause they're exempt from that, it seems.
The 830G only applies to zoning regulation. So if there are, for example, wetlands issues or WPCA issues that they can't overcome, the burden doesn't shift on those. So, if it's proposed in an area where there are no sewers and, the site is such that there isn't enough room for a septic system without impairing the wetlands, you can deny it on those bases, regardless of what they want to do in zoning. But, I think you want to make sure you're on a solid basis and not being kind of, superficial or too cute to, it's like, oh, we got a wetlands problem here. But, I think if there is, for example, inadequate, sewer capacity to accommodate a system of a, for a development of a certain size. I mean, I think that's a legitimate basis to deny something. I think, East Lyme, I think was one of the towns that had turned down a very large project based on the unavailability of sufficient sewer capacity to service it.
Were they successful in that decision?
So far, yeah.
How recently did they deny it?
It's within the last couple of years. All right. Anything else about anything? I mean, part of it is that, I joked about what's going on in the legislature. It's too early in the session to give everybody heartburn by talking about what's being proposed, but let you know when it happens.
Just a short commentary about time limits on special permits. Which, at least my understanding was that a special permit, once it was approved, kind of lasted forever. And if the commission was not able to set time limits, come to learn that that's not the case, but maybe you could talk about that. How to set a time limit on a special permit.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, this is one of those things that I think if you got 5 land use attorneys, you'd get 7 different opinions. Depending on who was representing who at any given time. As a general rule, a special permit is an approval that runs with the land. So it's just basically you're allowing something to happen. Permitted under the zoning regulations with certain criteria and conditions, and you approve it and it goes. There had always been kind of a debate as to whether you could put time limits on them or not. And a couple of things that happened within the last 2 or 3 years, I won't bore you with the minutia, have just really complicated it. One, a case called International Investors, which essentially said that you couldn't put a time limit on a special permit that was shorter than the time limit on the site plan that was the work being done under the special permit. And in most places, when you're getting a special permit, you also have a site plan that shows, what the work is that you're doing and how it's going to be laid out, to fit within the special permit. And, what happened there was, I think the site plan had expired, but the site plan had continued, but, they were arguing that the special permit had expired years ago because it had never been built. And the court basically said, no, you can't expire the special permit before the site plan. So, just stood for the principle that you couldn't do that.
So you're referring to site plan review that has limit, but we don't have that here. We haven't had separate site plan review or timelines on site plan.
Right. Yeah, which still baffles me, but I'll leave that for another day. The other thing that was going on at the same time was this little crazy thing called COVID. And when the legislature, I think it was in 21, was trying to kind of get out of living and regulating the world through executive orders, they wanted to give extensions to land use permits that may or may not have expired during COVID. or maybe expiring, right after COVID, so that everybody could, have a chance to deal with, supply chain issues and, Zoom meetings and all those great things. So what the legislature essentially did through, its usual magic of two conflicting statutes that it enacted in the same session was to make it so that site plan approvals, which you don't have, which are usually good for 5 years, extendable to 10, and in certain cases extendable to 14, could now be extendable to 19. And what they did with the special permits, which likewise, were good for 5 years, could be extended to 10, could be extended to 14. They basically said that special permit approvals that involve site plan work were valid for no less than 19 years. So it's like, all right, good forever, basically. As long as it was something that was approved prior to some date in 2021 and hadn't expired before then. So now we're back to the pre-COVID world of, 5-year approvals with a 5-year extension. For both the site plan and the special permit. And the premise is that if somebody gets approval to do something, you want them to actually do it, not hold on to this approval and have it just kind of linger out there forever so that it expires, eventually. The complication, and I think it's a lot of what you have here, and it's also what happens when the special permit is for a use where you're not necessarily building anything, is what do you do for that? Because there is no, site plan expiration that you have to go beyond or you can't be shorter than. And there's no good answer to that one because if you were, if, for example, you wanted to approve somebody building a Dunkin' Donuts as a special permit, and, you said, and your special permit is good for 2 years, after which we could revoke it or it expires or something like that. Nobody's going to build a Dunkin' Donuts that could potentially be pulled out from under them after 2 years. But, which is why you have the part about the work and so forth, so that at least they know that they have the finite period of time to build it and then it's good after that. But the dilemma is where you have something that is just a use with no work. And I think a lot of towns, a lot of commissions have tended to avoid making difficult decisions by putting time limits on things. Or have made difficult decisions and sort of convinced themselves that it's fine because we put a time limit on it. So that, if we, for example, this Dunkin' Donuts that we just approved turns into a disaster for traffic or something like that, 2 years from now, we can revisit it. And, at that point, I think you would be hard pressed to say, no, circumstances have changed. We've decided that it's not a good idea to, sell food on the state highway, stop what you're doing. On the other hand, where there, other activities that are just kind of activities where there's been no, major capital investment or anything like that. And it's something that, may be different from what you've usually, allowed or confronted. and the applicant doesn't complain about or object to or challenge the time limit, you know, it is what it is, so. Yeah, I'm surprised, but although, you know, I would have thought that the legislature or the courts would have dealt with that, but I mean, they've had this, you know, stalkerish obsession with, you know, affordable housing and site plan explorations and things like that lately, that they haven't had a chance to look at kind of fundamental big picture things like that. The only place that I've seen courts specifically uphold time limits on special permits was, you know, earth excavation, which is, you know, just by virtue of its inherent nature, something that, you know, is done when it's done, you know, and moves on to another location and so forth. And so, you know, gravel pits are basically treated differently than other kinds of special permit uses. And, you know, courts have just kind of nodded their head at that.
Thank you. Got another question now, with more philosophical and nothing against Dan here. Okay, just wondering about what is the authority of the commission versus the CEO? If there's a decision by a CEO that commission feels is not consistent with the intent of regulating.
I think there are kind of two ways you can address that. One is, Dan, what were you thinking?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah. I mean, and the other one is, you know, appealing his decision to either the ZBA or the court. Yeah, I mean, and that's sort of awkward because, you know, you have to demonstrate that you're the authority, you know, you're one of the parallel authorities that are able to, you know, interpret and enforce zoning regulations in town. You know, I think frankly, you'd really want to be on the same page as your own CEO, but it's always one of those kind of tricky situations because, you know, would just speak, you know, hypothetically, you know, almost always the CEO is somebody who's hired by the first selectman, you know, reports to them, is in their, you know, the budget that their stuff runs, and, you know, and you guys get together, you know, every couple of weeks to talk about, you know, whatever it is that's on your agenda, and you're not, you know, even though the regulations say that, you know, they may be enforced either by the commission or the zoning or its designated agent. You want to be on the same page, and I think probably the best practice I would suggest is that, you know, if the CEO is going to be doing some enforcing, you know, in an area that is uncharted territory, maybe talk to the chairman or someone else, you know, just to make sure that essentially they've got your back. Or no, that's not really what we had in mind, because, you know, you're both interpreting the regulations, and there may be differences in interpretation, but at the end of the day, you know, you're the duly authorized agent. So I think it's always good to make sure that, to the extent that you can, you know, people are on the same page. The difficult thing too is that, you know, there are only so many hours in the day, and the commission can suggest what things should be enforced and may want to suggest how they are enforced, but you know, ultimately it's his decision. You know, I was representing one zoning commission where they, you know, were taking a vote basically to direct the zoning enforcement officer to do or to not do something. And, you know, it went to court and it was basically, well, you know, great, you know, that was nice, but you know, it's a nullity in terms of, you know, legal effect because the zoning enforcement officer had the discretion to decide whether to do something or not. And, you know, the fact that you voted, you know, 4-2 to tell him to do something, you know, didn't make it so. I don't know, you've been in the same position. What do you think?
Hasn't always been easy.
Communication, here to listen to your concerns, I wanna work with you. But, miscommunication can happen in the absence of good communication.
And it's nothing that's come up, so I'm trying to cite a particular example. Trying to understand who has authority and how something can be adjudicated between the commission.
Yeah, I mean, I think the collaborative approach is both legally and practically more effective than, you know, than anything else because, you know, unless you're able to prove aggrievement and standing, you know, to be able to appeal his decision, you know, it's an uphill battle, and even then, you know, I don't know how Jay would feel about hiring 3 lawyers to represent the ZBA, the ZBO, and the Planning and Zoning Commission arguing about the same issues, so.
Anybody have anything else? Thank you, Attorney Roberts.
No, my pleasure.
Very, very informative. Good topics covered. Appreciate your input again. Julia?
I'm gonna email out the presentation for you. If you'd like a print, please let Tracy know and she can print it for you.
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Perfect. Good, thank you. That appears to bring us to agenda item 5. Second. Who made the motion? Who made the second? Motion by Tim Young to adjourn, seconded by Dean Rule. Is there any discussion on this matter? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That's so fast. Yes, 9:08. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, no,